Hello, my name is Alan Young and I'm here at the 40th anniversary of the British Association for Psychopharmacology meeting in Cambridge, and I'm speaking to Professor Nicol Ferrier. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. I'd like to kick off by asking you to tell us all a little bit about yourself.
Right, well, so I'm Professor of Psychiatry at Newcastle University. And in fact, I've been in Newcastle for the last 30 years. Moved there in 1984, and so my interest is in the neurobiology and treatment of severe affective disorders, both unipolar and bipolar. So we do research in understanding mechanisms, and we've also done some treatment trials, intervention studies. So my interest is largely affective disorders. Before I came to Newcastle, I was involved working at Northwick Park Hospital, and I was trained by Tim Crowe and Eve Johnson, which was very exciting. And there, of course, I was largely working on schizophrenia. But coming to Newcastle, there was a long tradition of affective disorders work, going back through Martin Roth and Donald Eccleston. So that's where I decided to focus my attention.
Could you maybe expand a bit more on the early years and how you got into research?
Well, it all stemmed really from I was very fortunate to be able to do an intercalated BSc when I was doing medicine, and so I did honours physiology, and very lucky to get into neurophysiology at that time. And
was that in Newcastle?
It was in Glasgow.
Glasgow.
It was the University of Glasgow. So I did a neurophysiology project as part of my bachelor's in science in physiology, and got really into neuroscience. And of course it was a very exciting time. I mean, I was talking about the early 70s, and things were really beginning to develop then hugely. So then I completed my medical degree and wasn't sure what to do, so I did some medicine. I did a couple of years of medicine, but wanted to get back into neuroscience, and wasn't sure how to do that. I was pretty sure I didn't want to do neurology for various reasons, and so in fact I took the step of actually wrote to the MRC, the Medical Research Council, saying that I had this background, and I got a very nice letter back from them, and they put me in touch with a couple of MRC units, but the one that attracted me most was to go to work with Tim Crowe and Eve Johnson at the Clinical Research Centre in Harrow. And the Clinical Research Centre in Harrow was set up by the MRC to be a place where clinical work went on and research. And it was a very exciting time. So I joined there in 77 and was there till 84. And I'm sure you know a bit about the history of that unit, but it really was a tremendous time, and Tim and Eve and others, Chris Frith, really revolutionised the way we thought about schizophrenia, the way we considered it, because you know, in only a few years before that, it had been considered to be the origins were not considered to be in the brain. Let's put it that way. And Tim and Eve really, I think, made a major conceptual shift, along, of course, with others. Robin Murray, Danny Weinberg, and so on were on the same theme. But I think Tim was really at the forefront of a big change there. So it was a very exciting time. And I did my MD on schizophrenia, and did a lot of did some clinical trials, and did some post-mortem work, and was involved in receptor work with some pretty famous names at the time, Alan Cross and Frank Owen, sadly no longer with us. So that prepared me for training, trained me, and fortunately, as it were, I really enjoyed doing clinical psychiatry too. And I think you probably know how amazing a trainer Eve Johnson was. She really was inspirational as a clinical trainer. So I didn't go into psychiatry because I wanted to do psychiatry. I wanted to do research. But fortunately, I grew to really love doing clinical work. So
and what made you move up to Newcastle?
Well, my MD was largely on a neuroendocrine theme, and we'd been looking at neuroendocrine output, particularly from pituitary output, in unmedicated schizophrenia, because that was one of the things that Northwick Park Clinical Research Centre had access to. So I then got to interest in neuroendocrinology, And at that time in Newcastle, there was an MRC neuroendocrinology unit, which was run by Jim Edwardson. So I got talking to him about continuing a neuroendocrine research theme in major mental illness. He was very interested to develop a clinical part to the unit. So the two things worked together, and I went to join that unit in 1977 and was there for 1984, and was there for quite a number of years. That unit subsequently developed. Newcastle's always been very famous for its dementia research, work by the Perrys and cholinergic hypothesis and so on.
And Martin Roth, of course.
And Martin Roth, indeed. So a tremendous unit. So that the unit then shifted into dementia largely, became the MRC neurochemical pathology unit. And at that point I then moved over to the academic department in Newcastle with Donald Eccleston to work for the university, and so I've been there ever since.
Tell us about your involvement with the BAP over the years. When did you first become involved with the BAP?
Yes, well, that was 1982. So I joined, and I had more or less finished my MD studies at that point, and was looking for. Well, I was looking for someone to present it, but I think more importantly to get someone to get it critiqued, and this has almost been the great strength of the BAP, is you get criticism in the best sense of that word. You get people giving both critique of it, but also constructive criticism. So I joined the BAP and someone to present the data, and I think the first meeting was in Cambridge, although I can't be sure about that. And of course then became very much a fan of the BAP and all that it stood for and stands for. So that's a development that worked for me very well, but you know, I wanted obviously to see it continuing to do that. So I became very involved with the BAP.
And you've served as various different offices, including president, and you've seen the development of things like our our continuing professional education for clinicians and so on. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that developed?
Yeah. So originally I joined as council member, then I became General Secretary, and at that time the General Secretary had to take responsibility for the education portfolio. And there was a lot of change around that time. We used to do a lot of regional meetings and so on, and some of those were really quite difficult to sustain. So a decision was made, which I guess I was part of, to focus on the summer meeting as our main scientific exercise, but to develop programs for both junior trainees in psychiatry and also for more senior trainees. And so from that it has evolved the master classes and the clinical certificate. And of course we've always been at great pains to develop equivalent programs for preclinical scientists, and they've also blossomed, which has been very rewarding to see through originally the certificate over a number of sessions, but now to this residential meeting. So it developed then, but the kind of real professionalism of it came later. I became president, and we were able to, I think, develop it a lot further in those most recent years. So now it's a very, very professional. It's highly regarded. It's as you know, the feedback is tremendous, and it's constantly evolving to meet with the needs, and that's led to the online, which of course Dr. McAllister Williams, who's from Newcastle, has very much fronted and is a tremendous development. So it's a very exciting time educationally, and I think we're market leaders in that field, probably not just in psychopharmacology, but in clinical training, or some aspects of clinical training as well. And of course our guidelines, which have also developed over these years, have sort of mirrored that and balanced that.
Been very influential. And
I think so, yes. I think they play a very important role, because the NICE guidelines, because of their particular methodology, can only do certain things. And they're constrained by that, which is, it's a strength in a way that that NICE has that methodology, but it's also a weakness when it comes to clinical practice. So the way I think the BAP guidelines have developed is to be firm about the evidence base and to interrogate it, but also to think about the scenarios that clinicians might meet. And that's why I think they're so popular, because they meet the answer, or at least partly answer the questions that clinicians want to have answered.
Psychopharmacology faces many challenges at the moment. So the pharmaceutical industry is constantly being re-engineered and reoriented. How do you see the future for our field?
Yes, well, it's also been disappointing that there's been a real stall in new products coming to market and also into new agents. That's been a disappointment, and I guess it mirrors the whole complexity of the phenotype we're dealing with, the real difficulty of getting proper models, of not having biomarkers and so on. And so that's been a real challenge, and there's obviously been a challenge scientifically, but also from the point of view of funding and the number of people doing PhDs. And in the heyday, in the 80s and 90s, we used to have masses of PhDs doing really often very good basic science funded by the pharmaceutical industry. So there's been a need to kind of reinvent things. But I think firstly, there's a clear identification of the problem. So I think we're working hard on phenotypic description. And as you know, the way to do that is really to look at clinical patterns, but also to look very carefully at the kind of patterns you might find underneath that, the cognitive profile, the neuroimaging profile, and so on. So that's a great thing, and I think that's going to lead eventually to characterization of targets that are important and will be validated. And I think our understanding at the same time, obviously, there's been a huge increase in neuroscience understanding, and so I'm just hopeful that psychopharmacology will benefit from those two major kind of thrusts. And so the future is, I think, optimistic, but there's still a lot of uncertainty there. And I guess we're always going to be in the position of perhaps identifying profiles that can be helped by drugs. I think we're a long way from actually getting something that will treat a condition. I think that's something that seems to be vanishing into the future. A little bit, but I think we can help with symptomatology in the next decade. I think we'll see new drugs that will help with symptoms.
And the future of the BAP, the next 40 years?
Right. Well, it's been a tremendous 40 years. You look back at it, the achievements by BAP members, for a start, scientifically have been great. The society has fostered people and has trained people, preclinical, and so it's been fun, and I see absolutely no reason why that should change. We've got a very exciting set of people involved with the BAP, and with all sorts of different disciplines. And the great thing about the BAP is it's an association. It brings together different disciplines with different backgrounds, with a common interest here, and I see that still very much continuing. And of course, I think the number of young people attending, for example, this meeting here, doing PhDs is really encouraging. So I'm cautiously confident that the BAP will continue to thrive, and the name psychopharmacology, it may not all be straightforward drug treatments of patients. It may be much more complex, and understanding the effect of drugs in the brain as a tool to understand the brain. That's the other component that I think will always be strong. So that side, I think, is being very strong for the future.
Well, Professor Nicol Ferrier, thank you very much.
Thank you.